And I appreciate that you brought that, and if we have any available for the audience, that would be great if we can, or pass one around if we can.
Yeah,
And Trey, how do you pronounce your last name?
It's Dail.
Dail. Thank you.
Commissioner Casady's not here, so whatever copy you brought her, I guess could be passed around.
Okay, perfect. Put that over there in case anybody would like an extra one.
Oh,
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to take the time to come up and introduce myself for one. Kind of, maybe answer any questions, fill you all in on the progress of the airport and the plans for the airport prior to your coming in, and see, what y'all's vision is, and make sure I'm, following that suit here. So like I said, my name's Trey Dail. I'm previously with TU Engineers. The firm we're currently under now is called Ardura. That was a fairly recent transaction. It was a September closing, so we're still transitioning. In fact, I still have the old TO logo on. So.
And your company does the engineering for who? Oh, we'll go to public comment. Okay.
But what I have for you here in front of you is the capital improvement plan, and it's just kind of a general exhibit of that capital improvement plan for the airport. Oh, I'm sorry, did I must have, here's one for you. Sorry. So I was just gonna run through this first, just to kind of kick things off, and then, of course, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Sure.
So currently, the airport's capital improvement plan has two projects planned for 2023, this coming year. The first project is the continuation of the environmental assessment, which is an ongoing project. That environmental assessment was initiated back in 2016. And the purpose of that project was to document environmental impacts associated with proposed improvements at the airport. Because the airport receives federal grant funding, they're required to meet the requirements of NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. So that's what this environmental assessment does. But there's, based on the age of the EA, like I said, it started in 2016. We're going into the 7th year now. There's been a lot of challenges and hurdles to get that project completed. And unfortunately, due to the NEPA policy, the airport can't do a lot of these improvements until that environmental assessment is completed.
And when do we think that might be completed?
Well, so the project has been on hold by the FAA, meaning that my firm wasn't able to do any work on that project for the last 2 years. So we feel that the FAA is going to give us approval to actually get back working on this project here this year, based on our meeting that we had with the FAA last week. I feel like everyone involved at the airport district office over in Helena, which is where your FAA PM project manager sits, is an agreement that the county is ready to move forward with that project now again. So if things get moving forward and everyone's in agreement, it will probably take a year to finalize that environmental assessment, if I had to guess right now.
Who's heading that environmental assessment?
My firm is.
Okay.
Yep. So the gentleman's name is Vince Barthels. He's our environmental lead. I'm a civil engineer by trade, but Vince is out of our Spokane office, so he's fairly local, and he's been working on the EA almost since its initiation back in 2016, so he's very familiar with the project. But yeah, we're hoping to get that one moved forward, because it does hinge, or a lot of the projects at the airport hinge upon the completion of that EA. So we'll have
And
to.
he's give you a target date of one more year?
No, that's based on my own assessment.
Okay.
Just because of a lot of the challenges facing the EA are reviewed by all the federal agencies that have to approve it. So it's not necessarily that's going to take us that long to do the work. Typically, we see a a review time of 3 to 6 months when we submit a document to the FAA for review like this, in terms of a planning document. I don't know if you picked up on it, but the Helen ADO only has 2 environmental staff in the entire office, and they do all of Montana and all of Idaho and parts of Wyoming. So every environmental document that comes through that
Goes through
office
those two
has to
people.
go to people, yeah. And when you look at environmental assessment, which is a fairly large document, you know, it's a lot of review, and, you know, they throw maybe 8 to 10 of those on each individual's schedule, and they've got a lot of work cut out for them.
Exactly.
So that'll be the biggest, you know, time constraint right there, is getting their approval. But in addition to that, you know, the environmental assessment has to be advertised to the public. If there are any comments received, there has to be a public hearing associated to address those comments. So there's a lot of work that goes into it.
Okay.
But kind of, and I guess I should probably step back and, you know, explain the purpose of the environmental assessment. So initially, when the environmental assessment was kicked off back in 2016, it was a much broader scope. Basically, the entire north side of the airport was planned for development, and that came from the airport's master plan document. So every airport that receives federal funding has to have a master plan. It's also approved by the FAA, and it basically is a planning document for the next 20 years of your facility. And it doesn't mean you have to do all those things, but it basically sets out the goals. It talks about, you know, what kind of air traffic you have at your facility, how much air traffic you have, any needs to grow, expand, things of that nature. And one of the things that your master plan identified, and my firm did the master plan too, that was back in 2013, we did that work. But one of the things that the master plan identified was a need for hangar space. There's been a lot of growth in all the airports in North Idaho over the past few years with the growth of the state, which is a kind of a byproduct. So pretty much every airport that I work at, and I work at almost all of them in North Idaho, have a lot of people that want to build hangars right now, and a lot of new people coming into the area. And Shoshone County right now is constrained by its existing property limits in terms of being able to accommodate that demand for additional hangar space. So the master plan recommended some property acquisition to allow for new taxiways, aprons, and hangars to be developed. In addition to that, it recommended some safety improvements associated with navigational aids, and also safety improvements associated with protecting each end of the runway in terms of airspace. But to make a long story short, basically when we kicked off the EA, we were looking at developing the entire north side. However, there are some wetlands. Obviously, the airport's very close to the Portland River. And there's also some public walking trails just north of the airport, between the airport and the river, that are utilized. So whenever you are impacting wetlands and or public facilities, it complicates the environmental assessment process, because now we've identified impacts to the public and impacts to the environment. So about 2 or 3 years into the EA, the FAA said, you know, maybe we need to step back and redefine the goals and the justification behind the EA. So we kind of took another look at it and said, well, you know, based on the growth historically of the airport, we could probably just develop this small section shown on this exhibit on the north side. We don't need to develop the entire north side, at least not at this time or within the next 10 to 20 years, and still provide some hangar space to meet that demand. So that's what we did. We trimmed it down, moved it all to the west side, and we're trying to push forward to get the EA completed under this revised scope now, which would include some apron development, some taxiway development, some vehicle roads, and then that would allow for some hangars to be built on those taxi lanes. The EA also includes some land and easement acquisition off to the west end of the runway, to, again, protect that approach over there from trees that it's currently penetrated by. There's some other miscellaneous projects such as perimeter fencing. One thing that the airport's kind of dealt with historically is elk and deer coming off the mountains from the north and walking out on the runway, which is obviously a safety concern. Things of that nature.
Now, the purchase, the acquisition of property, is that funded through a grant or?
It would be,
Now, have you contacted the property owners, or is that, how does that all work?
It's DEQ land.
we would at that time. So we can't proceed with that acquisition until the environmental assessment is completed.
Okay, so you'll basically be talking to the property owners and so forth.
Right,
Okay.
typically we would.
Okay.
I mean, we do have sponsors, I should call them clients, airports that prefer to do the land acquisition on their own, or, because maybe they feel, confident to be able to do that, but we also do land acquisition for airports as well.
Help, back up just a step and help me with
Mhm.
funding. So paying for this EA, paying for land acquisition, paying all this is all
Yeah.
through federal funds?
For the majority, but that's a good question. Let me run through that. So as, what's identified as the NIPIAS airport, the NIPIAS acronym is a acronym for all of the airports throughout the United States. So it's a national inventory of airports throughout the US. And you qualify in it, not all airports do, but you primarily qualify due to your location and that you're not close to other airports. So the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has deemed it necessary to have a certain amount of airports throughout the nation, just in the best interests of their country. And as such, they've, Congress and others have passed laws to provide funding to keep up the infrastructure. So as a NIPIAS airport, you're classified as a small general aviation airport. So what you receive in terms of funding, and you don't necessarily receive it, I should use the word qualify. You qualify for what's known as non-primary entitlements. Non-primary is just a designation that you're a non-primary airport. Primary airports are the larger commercial ones. But under that non-primary entitlement funding, you're eligible for $150,000 of funding a year. And that's been consistent over the last 25 years or so. And you can save that money up for 3 years if you have larger projects to do. But you can't just save it for perpetuity. So after 3 years, it expires and it's thrown back into the national system if you don't use it then. In addition, there's other grant funding available from the FAA. There's state apportionment funding. State apportionment is basically an allotment of funding that the FAA gives to our state. And we have a ITD Aeronautics Division that has given the authority to allocate that funding to airports throughout the state. So that's another pool of funding that you can qualify for. And then there's discretionary funding. Discretionary funding is a national pool. Basically, you would be competing for that funding with all of the commercial airports throughout the nation, all the other general aviation airports, very competitive. So you have to have a really high priority project to compete for that kind of funding.
Now, do you guys write those grants, or is it?
We do.
Okay.
And then just to kind of dive into that a little more, the federal funding, at least for the state of Idaho, it varies by state, is a 90% grant. So,
Okay. So it's a 10%. Okay.
So 10% is required locally, and then to help out with that, ITD Aeronautics Division typically provides matching funds that ranges from 2 to 6%, depending on how much funding they have available that year. So
2 to 6% of the total 100%, or 2 to 6% of our 10%?
No, 2 to 6% of the total project.
Okay,
So
so
that
that would knock
typically
ours
gives you-
down to 4%.
Correct.
Or even
8 to 4%.
Okay.
Yep. So, it's, you know, a good deal in terms of reducing cost of projects, but it still requires funding, especially on these larger projects. Matching funds can definitely, you know, be a strain on the county in terms of providing that stuff. To kind of complicate the issue, you know, one thing you have to understand is that because the FAA provides 90% of the funding, the county has to sign what are called grant assurances, and basically it stipulates all the rules that you will abide by. And one of those rules is that you will build all your projects to FAA standards. And the FAA has some pretty strict standards for constructing stuff, which as a byproduct increases the cost of construction projects. So what you might look at as a fairly simple project for building a taxiway or runway using a local pavement design or a base course design, the FAA has a higher level of requirements for that material in construction. So that comes into play
So
as
the
well.
federal government runs the cost up a little bit,
Absolutely.
meeting those standards.
Now, the hangars that were just built, are they up to the FAA standards that were just?
So the hangars that were just built are owned privately by the people that built them.
Okay.
So it's your airport, the county owns the land,
Mm-hmm.
and then the land is then leased to your hangar owners. But the buildings themselves, at least most of the buildings out there, are owned by private entities. There are, I know of one hangar that's owned by the county that was recently purchased within the last 5 years, I would say. You do own the pilot's lounge, and things of that nature. And I'm not, probably haven't had a chance to look at the leases, and I haven't seen them either, but typically, these are long-term leases. You know, the construction of that one large hangar that's currently going up out there, it's a significant investment in today's economy, upwards of maybe $100,000. So my point in that is that these leases are typically long-term leases. Typically they're 20 years at most airports with an option for another 10-year, because people don't want to invest that kind of infrastructure on a year-to-year lease or something like that. So, but I don't write leases, so I'm not sure what yours is.
It's a huge investment on land that they do not own.
We'll do public comment later.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. We just want to give him his report, and then we're gonna let everybody have questions, because I know we all, he's our, have you met?
No.
Okay, so he will have introductions here in a minute, but he lives out at the airport.
Perfect.
Property, keeps an eye on everything for us. Okay, please continue.
Okay, so I think that kind of summarizes the first of two projects that you have planned for this year in 2023, the environmental assessment. The second project that you currently have planned this year is a pavement maintenance project on all of the existing pavement out there. Because it's existing pavement and it's a maintenance project on the existing pavement, it doesn't have to be covered by the environmental assessment, meaning we can meet the requirements of MEPA, which I've actually already done, just do a simple request to the FAA. But this project is intended to seal all the existing cracks out there, which all of your pavement out there is HMA or asphalt pavement, if you will. You don't have any BCC or Portland cement concrete. So this would seal all the cracks. It would apply a seal coat to the existing pavement surface, and then it would install new pavement markings on all of that, because obviously we'd be covering up the old markings with the seal coat and things of that nature. But it's something that's recommended by the FAA, and typically every 4 to 7 years. I think it was about 7 years since we last did it on the airport, so it's, you know, due from a maintenance perspective. But it's not necessary to do it. The reason it got kind of put up on the CIP in 2023 is once we realized that all of these other projects that may be a little higher priority, we're gonna be pushed off for another year. We were just kind of looking at, well, what can we get accomplished? And we worked with the previous commissioners to kind of say, well, here's one option if you'd like to do some just maintenance, you know. It's considered a maintenance project. It prolongs the life of the asphalt, trying to prolong that eventual day when you have to reconstruct or rehabilitate that pavement section there.
Is that included in the grant, or is that something that the county's gonna have to?
No, that's covered under the same grant.
Okay.
Funding.
But we maybe have had to set aside some money for match.
Yes, yeah.
One big question I have is, did they set money aside for match?
It's a good question, I'll find the answer for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
You know the cost of that already?
Well, we haven't even been able to go under contract, so just kind of diving into more of the FAA details. We were planning to start design on that project back in December of last year, and the FAA notified the county that our 5-year selection, so let me back up. So again, an FAA rule, we talked about some of them, but another rule is that you have to go out for a qualifications-based selection for engineering consultants or planning consultants or anything like that. You can't just go out and hire someone. And after you do go out for selection, you have to do it every 5 years at minimum. You have the opportunity, you could do it every year if you wanted to, but the FAA says you can't just hire someone and keep them in-house for decades or anything like that. You have to go back out. And it's a qualifications-based selection, so it's not a fee-based selection at all. So we submit a statement of qualifications, and then sometimes they're interviews, and then the county makes a selection. So my point being, we planned to do the design back in December, and the FAA said, well, the previous selection's due for reselection, so we got delayed by about a month. And we haven't actually initiated the project now. Definitely didn't want to initiate it with you all coming in to see here until I'd spoken with you all. But the FAA has been notified of the intention of the county back in December to do this project. So in terms of costs, you know, we have the capital improvement plan where we put rough order of magnitude cost for all of these projects, and that's attached here on the back pages, so that will give you an idea of, and I can look it up real quick too, because they're not the easiest to follow sometimes. So it looks like the pavement maintenance project is estimated to be around $400,000. And then I've identified the sponsor's local share in red, in the red column there. And of course, it's based on the assumption that, it looks like that assumption assumes probably about a 2 or 4% match from the state. So you'll notice that the sponsor share is higher than the state share. And I don't know what that'll be. The ITD has not announced what their matching share will be for 2023 yet. And this CIP document here includes all of your projects and their estimated costs for the next 7 or so years. And if you'd like, I can run through them real quick. Sure. Okay.
Because some of this happened on that Zoom meeting, but that was like my second day in office, and I may have missed a few details.
Right. So if we look at 2023, that'll be in the environmental assessment phase 3. And then we broke out, we actually don't, this is the state's form, so we just try and discern it. But the next 3 projects listed under 2023, they're identified as rehabilitation projects, but it's apron, taxiway, runway. That's the pavement maintenance project that we were just discussing. 2024, you have no projects listed. It's a carryover year, which is important for an airport of your size because you know, you only receive $150,000 a year. So if you have larger projects coming up, typically you will have carryover years where you have to save that funding up, and you can save it up to a maximum of $600,000 before you start losing that money.
And the 3 years, isn't it?
It is 3 years, but then you get, so you've saved up the last 3 years of NPEs, but you also qualify for this year. So you kind of qualify for 4 years of NPE, so that's why you get to 600.
So we have to spend 150 from the.
Or you lose it.
Or you lose it, okay.
That's right. In 2025, we show the land acquisition because, of course, you know, all of development that we show on the front page there in the exhibit can't take place until that land is acquired. So that would be land acquisition, and then we would also plan to do the design of the project. You know, we kind of, you know, this CIP, I will say, is kind of just based on the project elements listed in the environmental assessment. They don't really take, you know, a hard look in terms of how the project will be phased. Because I can tell you, you know, from the scope of this project here, just showing the apron, the taxiways, the taxi lanes on the front, you know, with your airport only qualifying for a maximum of $600,000 in funding, you can't do this construction all in 1 year. Therefore, you end up having to phase the project over several years. Or you have to qualify for the state apportionment funding, which I mentioned is that other pool, or discretionary. But discretionary projects are not going to fund expansion of hangar development areas. Discretionary is more like, I have a runway safety issue, or my runway needs to be reconstructed, or something really high priority. So, but state apportionment you can qualify for because it's at the state level, as long as you know, it's basically up to the state to determine, but below these are to qualify for. But obviously it's a much smaller pool of funding. But anyway, if assuming the project would be designed, or at least a phase of the project would be designed in 2025, and then you really start getting into 26, 27, and definitely probably 28 would be phased construction based on the funding limitations available to the county. After that tax lane or apron, or however much construction you may or may not want to do there is completed, another project that was listed on your CIP is the construction of helicopter pads. The airport sees a lot of use of firefighting activities in the summertime during fire season. Most of that is just limited to rotary wing operations, helicopters. You don't get a lot of fixed wing because your runway isn't long enough to serve the big tankers that are, you do get some seats, which are the single engine attack aircraft that will come in if there's a local fire. But you typically see on a regular basis helicopters that will come and base at the airport for a month or two, and they'll just kind of fly around to some of the fires that may not even be local, but they like to base out of here. Your airport offers fuel, which is beneficial, although I don't think the Jet A tank has been operational ever at your facility. I think you're only offering avgas at this time. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. That's why under 2028 you show the construction of the helicopter pads, which is a pretty straightforward project there, but probably be a nice improvement. 2029 is land acquisition again. That's for the approach end off the west end of the runway. And again, that's to just prohibit any sort of incompatible land use. You'd hate for someone to purchase that land and build a house right off the end of the runway or something of that nature. So that's what that intention's for. And then I think, or it keeps on going out. So you do have some 2030 was where the fence got pushed out to. It's listed as an equipment, acquire equipment, design, equipment installation. And it does mention fencing, but it's a little hard to decipher if you just read that as equipment and you're wondering what that is. But anyway, that would be installing perimeter fencing around the entire airport. Again, to mainly keep the animals off of the runway. And the reason that fencing project just pushed so far out, we felt that it would behoove the efficiency of the project to wait till all the land acquisition was completed before you put fencing up. Obviously, if you put fencing up now and then you acquire more property, you've got to move the fence or something like that. But I bring that up because if the fencing becomes an issue, you know, we could probably get a portion of the project put up, or a portion of the fence put up, just to try and help out a little bit. It's kind of interesting, your airport has a automated gate, so down in the access road there, so you kind of restrict the vehicle access as it is, but, you know, there's no fencing beyond that other than the street restraint bar that kind of runs around the airport. So that was 2030. 2031, we look at some of your navigational aids. Your master plan called for some supplemental wind cones on either end of the runway. Got airfield guidance signs to help pilots determine, you know, what taxiway they're on, things of that nature. Your existing segmented circle and wind cone, which you do have, is currently located too close to the runway to meet the FAA's standards for safety. So your master plan recommended that we relocate that segmented circle and wind cone a little farther away from the runway. And then we've also listed the installation of reels, which are runway end identifier lights. They're just lights that help pilots come in, discern the difference between the runway and maybe some lights that may be coming from the Walmart parking lot or something like that, which is in close proximity to the airport. That's the intention of those. So those are kind of some nav aid fixtures. They're relatively small projects, so if any of those came up as a, you know, higher priority for you, or you hear some, you know, you have some issues with something at the airport, we could probably definitely move those up higher in the years, because they're so small, they're relatively easy to fit in. And then the last project listed in 2032 is the installation of an AWASH, which is an automated weather observation system. And that was just recommended because of the airport's location in the valley. You really don't have any local weather stations for pilots that want to maybe land during the wintertime or inclement weather. So that AWAS would be sited on this large yellow piece of property that appears to not have any development on it. At least that was the plan. But the benefits of the AWAS is that that information gets disseminated over the internet, and pilots that are actually en route flying can either go onto the internet and see what the weather is, what the visibility is, and determine if it's safe to come into the airport or not. And it is, because I mean, it'd be a nice asset, but it's also very expensive. The equipment is, as well as the maintenance is. So you have to maintain that equipment. Technicians have to come out and check it every year on an annual basis. And there are fees associated with that maintenance, which are not eligible under a grant.
So if we do that, we're committing to funding for maintenance.
That's correct. Yeah. But that one's pretty far out on the CIP. You know, typically these CIPs are accurate for the next 2 to 3 years, and anything beyond that, it gets shuffled around a lot based on as the priorities of the airport shuffle around. Let's see, I had a few things I wanted to go over. You know, we talked about funding a little bit. I should just make you aware of some additional funding that's available to the airport right now. So currently, the airport has 3 open grants from the FAA that have already been awarded and executed by the county in past years that are known as CARES grants. I'm not sure if you've heard of the CARES funding that came out of Congress a few years back. So you have 3 grants. They're typically maintenance grants. They're smaller grants ranging from $15,000 to $35,000. I think the maximum you have is about 30 or 20. But anyway, these 3 grants are already available to you. They're intended to pay for things to just keep the airport open and operational. So you can be reimbursed for the airport's insurance, electricity bills, you know, and maybe any supplies that the airport needs. But they're not intended for use as improvements to the airport, you know. So those are already there. I do assist with, I know you have, typically, historically, we've been the engineer for, I don't know, maybe 15 years here at the airport. Historically, we did all the requests for reimbursements for the grants, but I know you have Colleen now that is your grants administrator, so I know she's trying to get up to speed, but I've already reached out to her and said, hey, if you have any questions on how to, you know, request funding for these grants. Those are really easy to get funding for. Typically just takes a printout of airport expenses, and we just submit it into the FAA. But I wanted to bring that up for you, just so
But
you.
no improvements, so I couldn't use that to pave an apron in front of the hangar.
Typically, they would not, that would not qualify under those grants. But if you had a building that needed a new paint job, that would be a maintenance grant. Or if you had pavement that was failing or something, and you needed to repave that pavement, that would be maintenance because of an existing infrastructure. You're not expanding the infrastructure. All of the airports receive this funding, so, one of the things we've kind of offered for airports' consideration is that if you need to do some work that maybe doesn't qualify under these grants, well, by all means, take advantage of these grants by getting your electricity bill paid and your insurance and whatever you may have. Airports typically have a number of expenses to get this $30,000, put it in the county coffers, and
What about the chip seal that we're doing? We're basically, what you're doing this year, you wanna do the rehabilitate the apron, taxiway and runway.
mhm.
So it's, would our
For the match?
match, could that go for the match since?
That's a question everyone asks, and no, the FAA specifically wrote that you could not use your maintenance grants or your CARES grants for matching funds. But that was a question that everyone asked when they first came out, was that an option? And then, so in addition to the CARES grants, you also have, you don't have currently any awarded, but you have BIL grant funding. So BIL is the bipartisan infrastructure law that came out last year from Congress. And as part of that law, the FAA was directed by Congress to award additional grants to each airport for the next 5 years. So this is it's kind of a supplementary grant program that's only gonna last from 2022 to 2026. And for your airport, they haven't allocated it for each year, but in 2022, you weren't awarded, sorry. You have at your discretion to use $110,000 in grant funding. Each year it changes a little bit because they have to go back and redo the equations on how the money's allocated. So far, it's been a very minimal change. In 2023, you were awarded, again, I wanna use that, even though it hasn't been given to you as a grant, it's at your discretion, $113,000, so it only went up by $3,000. So we anticipate the next 3 years after those first two to be in that range. That grant funding, similar to non-primary entitlements, each year has to be programmed and awarded within 5 years of that initial award date. So your 2022 grant, for example, that again has not been allocated, needs to be awarded by, I believe, 2025, or you'll lose that funding, and then you would lose the 2023 the year after.
So
that.
it's 3 years?
No, I believe it's
2027, okay. So
Yeah.
2022, okay.
And what can that be used for?
that's improvement grants, yeah.
And are those grants already written? Did you guys write those? Those are grants already funded and available, right?
The funding is already available, so we haven't written the grant applications, but it's kind of it's just basically crossing the Ts and dotting the Is. The FAA's already said, if you want this money, find an appropriate project, and we'll provide you the funding for it. The county's been designated that funding for your use if you want to utilize it.
Why didn't we use it last year?
Well, again, that was all based on the fact that the environmental assessment has been on hold the last 2 years. So other than pavement maintenance, when you kick off an environmental assessment, you have basically, the FAA will not provide you any grant funding for any improvement projects until that environmental assessment is completed. The only reason they're willing to provide you funding for the pavement maintenance, if you choose to move forward with that project, is because it's a maintenance project and it's considered critical to prolong the life of the pavement. But, if you wanted to go build something right now that absolutely needs to be done, the FAA is not gonna participate until the environmental assessment is done.
So could I use this BIL money to pave aprons in front of new hangars?
Not until the environmental assessment's done. And I will just touch on that really quickly, paving aprons in front of hangars. Because the pavement directly in front of hangars is not considered public use pavement. There is a litany of rules and regulations associated with using FAA funding. One of those is that the pavement right in front of a hangar door is considered private pavement, and the FAA will not provide funding for it. So that's always a consideration when you're, building infrastructure and things of that nature.
Even when it's on county land?
Yes. Yeah. Again, it's all of.
Obviously, I've had 2 or 3 requests in the last week for finishing some aprons on some new buildings that we
Yep.
have promised.
Sure.
Is that usually when when you've seen buildings the hangars being built before, is that usually up to the person building the hangar to do their own aprons, or is that?
Well, it depends. So, we always advise airports to consider 2 things when they're going to allow someone to build a hangar. So when you build a taxiway, which is typically how the aircraft would get to their hangar, the FAA requires a safety area around that taxiway that extends beyond the edge of pavement. Basically, it's for the wingspan of the aircraft to have a safe passage to get through. So there's a safety area, and I'm not using the term, it's actually called an object-free area, but I'm just trying to speak in layman here. So when you're building that hangar, the FAA says the very most the closest you can build that hangar to the taxiway is on the edge of that safety area. And a lot of people say, well, that's where I'm gonna build my hangar, right there. But the reality is, and that's fine, as long as you just wanna pull out of your hangar and take off. But some guys like to pull their hangar out of their aircraft to wash it, do whatever they want. So if they don't set the hangar back enough so they can pull their aircraft out and have it parked in front of their hangar without penetrating the safety area of that taxiway, well, now you're creating an issue. And it's a very small issue, but again, it's all about the standards in the FAA and meeting their requirements. But what you get sometimes is somebody maybe pulls their hangar out, they go to lunch, someone else decides they want to go flying, and now there's an aircraft blocking the taxiway. So it goes back to that hangar and where it's set. Obviously, everyone wants it as close to the taxiway as possible because that reduces costs for the approaches. But if you want to be able to park outside, you need to take that into consideration when you're putting those up.
So our problem is we leased the land for the hangars, but we still own the land for the approaches. We didn't lease them that, we just promised to pave it. Okay. And by we, I don't mean you and I.
Yeah.
Okay. So, 23, you've mentioned these 2 projects, 24, we're really saving up money for 25.
Yeah, this development here is going to be a large undertaking for the airport if you all decide to move forward with it. It's going to be a lot of cost, land acquisition, building all that infrastructure. You've got a vehicle access road that's going through there. There's also some utilities in that vicinity that I'm aware of. There's a sewer line that runs through there right now. There's a water main, things of that nature. And not that I say you need to extend water and sewer to these hangar sites, but it may require some form of relocation to allow for the infrastructure to be constructed.
My lack of questions is me absorbing.
Now, talking
All
about
this.
the utilities, so if there's utilities that run underneath here, is that part of the grant to move the utilities around where that would be part of it?
So under the FAA's rules, if you build an FAA approved project and you need to relocate existing utilities, they will cover that cost. But they will not pay to extend utilities to to, for example, your hangar development. If you said, well, I wanna have water and sewer for my hangar, development, they won't pay to extend it, so that becomes a local cost. But if you build a taxiway and there's something we need to relocate, yes, they will pay the relocation fee.
And just a dumb question, but how are we paying TO? Through the grants? Is that to be a
Yes,
grant
our
administrator?
services are covered under the grant as well.
And are those outlined in this spreadsheet as far as our grant administration costs, are those here?
When we do a rough order of magnitude costs, which is what we use for capital improvement plan development, because we don't have all the details of the project, so we're just basing on our experience. We include a contingency for engineering design and inspection and things of that nature. So those costs we intend to include our services. I say that with a hesitancy because over the last 2 years with COVID and the impacts of that, we've basically seen construction costs doubled just across the state. So a lot of our capital improvement plans that we wrote 2 or 3 years ago, we've had to go back and completely redo because, for example, it's probably the biggest example, but 2 years ago, or probably 3 years ago, we used to pay around $100 a ton for asphalt. And that was the FAA grade asphalt, which is about 10 to 20% more expensive than normal asphalt. Last year, we received bids for asphalt in the $200 to $300 range. That's double or triple what we saw just a few years ago. And unfortunately, it doesn't just stop there with asphalt. It's kind of electrical components, taxiway edge lights were basically double, things of that nature. But overall, the conveying point is that construction is just getting more expensive, unfortunately.
Okay, so just bear with me, I'm slow here. So when I look at these line items, environmental assessment, apron and that, when I see $100,000, that's including your costs for TO.
Yes.
Okay, so some percentage of that is so when we have matching funds, we don't have any additional costs. We're already covering your company's costs in these
Estimates.
estimates.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. And how many years have you been the airport engineer here?
So I think my firm, I was trying to think it on the way up the road today. I think we've been there since about 2007, but I haven't been the engineer that long. I've been probably running the projects out at the airport for the last 10 years, I would guess. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
But my boss ran it before me, and so we do have a long history at the airport. So
Appreciate it. Anything else you wanted to share before I open it up for questions?
I think I've covered all the points that I wanted to kind of bring to your attention. I guess the last thing I would add, and I understand it probably isn't on the agenda for an action item, but one thing I'd like to get, from you all in the near future is just, with the new commissioners that are in seat, you have these 2 projects planned for 2023. So just, once you all have an opportunity to talk about this and digest it, just want to hear back from you all in terms of whether you'd like to move forward with the environmental assessment this year or not, whether you'd like to move forward with the pavement maintenance project this year or not. And I should outline some scheduling deadlines associated with those projects. So the environmental assessment, that one is a little more flexible because it's a planning project. It doesn't have any construction deadlines or anything like that. But of course, I guess the only time constraint associated with that is the longer that EA is outstanding without being completed, it prolongs the ability of the airport to expand. And I think that's really the major impact of that. But if the airport would like to do or the county would like to do some maintenance on the pavement that's out there this year, the FAA states that we have to have contractor bids open by April the 1st of this year. And what that means is that my firm would have to, well, first get under contract to do that work. We'd have to design it, get FAA approval for that design. We have to go out for public bids, which all takes some time. It's not that we can't get it done, but I just bring that up for your consideration in terms of, you know, if you say, well, we're not sure about this and we need to talk about it, that's completely understandable. But if, you know, you all decide in mid-March that, yeah, you'd like to move forward with it, we're probably would not be able to complete it at that time.
Okay, so you need to know sooner rather than later if we can come up, if we're okay with this, which for us means we've gotta see if they budgeted for these things.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
Give you guys time to do that and then schedule, and I don't know where you live, Trey, or how long it is. Takes
I'm at a
for you to-
Coeur d'Alene,
Okay.
so I'm not very far
So
at
we
all.
could schedule another meeting once they have time
Absolutely.
to digest and
Mhm.
go over the budget and stuff.
if you had your druthers, when would you like to go by?
You know, fortunately for pavement maintenance, there's no design to pavement maintenance. We just have to put of course with the FAA, we have to put the documents in accordance with their requirements. So it's just preparing the documents. Doesn't take us very long at all. And your ADOPM is Roxanne Trotta. She was on the call last week, or maybe it was this week, I forgot. No, it was last week. Yeah. She's really easy to work with. So with that, you know, if I could know by February or maybe the second week, I would say first week of February. In reality, typically, you know, with the contractor bids, you know, minimum is 2 weeks bidding. For a project like this, 2 weeks is fine. People know what they're going to charge us for crack sealing. So my point being that is that if I have to have bids open by April 1st, I start backtracking from there. So I need to advertise the second week of March, and then I need about a month of coordination with the FAA to get those plans put together and get Roxanne's approval for us to advertise, is what I'm looking at. Also need to prepare some grant applications for you as well, which they don't have a hard deadline, but the FAA requests that we submit those in mid-February for the two funding. And you'll see if you look at the CIP, you know, based on the funding you all have available this year, my approach to it, and it's completely just my opinion, you all can do it however you like. I was planning to use your non-primary entitlements for the pavement maintenance project and use your BIL funding for the environmental assessment. And again, that's because the EA really doesn't have a hard schedule. And that BIL funding, you can apply for that anytime during the year. You can't apply for the non-primary entitlements anytime during the year. They have a set schedule in terms of, I need a grant application in February, you've gotta have your bids open at this date, and if you miss those deadlines, you know, you can apply for it next year type stuff.
Okay.
And the reason I'm not, you know, you might ask, well, why not use the BIL for the pavement maintenance? Because it's more flexible from a timeline perspective. Well, you only received 113,000 last year in BIL. You'll receive another 110 this year, so it's only 223,000. It won't be enough to do the project, is why.
Okay.
But you have $600,000 in non-primary entitlements because, you know, over the past 3-4 years, y'all haven't done any projects.
So if we don't do a project this year, then one's gonna lapse, right? We got
Oh,
3 years.
you've lapsed a couple of times.
Oh, okay.
And it's not, you know, there's lots of airports that don't use the
Yeah.
funding. If you can't come up with the matching funds and you
Exactly.
don't have a project,
Right.
you know, it just
That's
goes
right.
back. And actually, the state's really good about, transferring those funds to other airports that may have a need that year. So it's not like the money's lost, it's lost to the local county, but it gets utilized by the airport. But
Okay.
I bring that up because, you know, if you get to a point that you're actually gonna do maybe some of these taxiway projects later on, and you say, well, we're gonna need some more funding, we can always go to the state and request, hey, if anyone else has expiring funds this year, remember, we had some expiring funds a few years back that, you know, somebody used, we don't know who, so we'd like to put our name on the list as for
Okay.
consideration.
Okay. Any more questions at the moment from you, Jim, before I open it up?
Okay. All my questions are answered
So I'm gonna.
so far.
I really appreciate you educating us on all of this. And we'll get the hang of it.
Sure.
It's gonna take a little bit, and I'm kind of the rep for the airport, so I'm sure I'll be calling you and picking your brain more often than not. I'm gonna open this up to public questions and comment, and if you do raise your hand and I pick on you, then please state your name for the benefit of the clerk here, so she can keep track of that. But do we have any questions or comments from Justin?
My name is Dustin Wise. I'm with Wise Aircraft out at the airport. How much of the master plan is still active?
So when you say active, what do you mean by active?
This is original. Roof leak.
Yeah.
So, this is original. Of course, I know it's been modified several times, but like, with our current airport classification, all these hangars in front are in violation of how close they have to be, or that they can be, to the center line of the taxiway. Is that correct? Or no, actually, the center line of the runway to the center line of the taxiway, which the center line of the taxiway would basically run infringe on the existing hangars. Correct?
Well, let me, not correct it, but add to that, because, so, under your airport's master plan that was done back in 2013, the FAA has different classifications of airport, I won't get into the classifications, but basically, under that master plan airport, the FAA said, we understand that your airport is this size, whatever that size is right now, we'll call it small. But we want you to plan for your airport to be able to expand in the future if that justification or demand shows up. So as part of that planning to expand in the future, you need wider safety areas, as Dustin's alluding to here. So under the master plan project, basically the direction from that was that if you're going to build any new hangars, don't build them across the existing line of hangars, because those hangars are too close to the runway for the future growth of the airport. Build them back to this new imaginary line that we've identified. But it wasn't that you need to go out there and wipe out all your hangars and push everything back. It's just that over the progress of work, if you're going to put up a new hangar, they need to be put back here. And as these hangars on the front, as they deteriorate, age, if they need to be reconstructed, don't reconstruct them in the existing location, push them back to this line. And then eventually you would have a clearer safety area is the process. But Dustin, to your question about the new safety area, the wider safety area, the airport isn't operating under that wider safety area yet, and it won't until those larger aircraft show up. So you're still operating under the standard, not the standard, your existing safety areas, which the hangars are outside of those safety areas. And they will be until, like I said, some larger aircraft start basing out of it or using the airport on a regular basis. And then the FAA will say, well, okay, you've got a small jet or some twins that are coming in now. Now we need to widen your safety area out, and now we need to maybe look at these hangars. But it's more of a gradual progression. If you're going to build new, please build it farther back than it is now. But by all means, keep the existing hangars where they are until they're fall down or something like that, or the leases expire and that person chooses not to renew that lease or something like that. Maybe that's an opportunity to move some of these hangars back. But it's not intended to say, get a bulldozer and knock all these down and push everything back at this time.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
Because, most all my customers own those hangars.
Sure.
So, okay, and, I know this is geared a lot more towards like getting an IFR approach.
Yeah, I don't know if due to terrain, if the airport would ever qualify for IFR. I mean, they've made a lot of improvements in the GPS approaches over the past 10 years, and
Mhm.
maybe over the coming 10 years, maybe they will eventually, but the terrain off the ends of the runway is such that I don't think it would be foreseeable right now. You could probably get a circling approach in there right now,
Yeah.
but it would be so high that if there's cloud base, you're not gonna see the airport and be able to come down through the clouds.
It'd be so high, you might as well just fly VFR.
Right.
Let's see, another question I have, let's see. What is our classification of airport right now?
I believe you're a B1 small, but it'll put it on here, right here. Yes, you were a B1 small, and the the FAA was requesting that you plan for a B1. So basically, you just lose that small designation, and that small designation is 12,500 pounds or less from an aircraft
Right.
maximum takeoff weight.
Okay, and then, going back to pavement maintenance, one of the things that previous administrations have done is, on the very east end, is regrinds.
Yeah, they used it in front of some of the hangars
Yeah,
out there.
and it was a temporary fix. I
Mhm.
don't know I don't think it was approved or anything,
No.
for grants or anything. It was just kind of what the county could afford.
Right.
But, you know, we all know that, I call it the self-chalking area, because it's the only open area where a large jet can turn around and such,
Mm-hmm.
other than right in the way in front of the fuel pumps where everybody's trying to get fuel. And so, you know, on a hot day, after a couple hours, hey, it's there.
Right.
You know, they'll get out just fine, but, you know, it's not
Right.
that stable. It's not what's supposed to be there.
Sure.
Would that be covered under the asphalt maintenance or not?
No, that would, like you said, it's not an AIP. AIP is Airport Improvement Program. That's where you get your grant funds from the FAA. But I do have a lot of small airports that do something similar to that. You know, I have airports that, a lot of them in North Idaho now, they want to build more hangars, and it's out in the field. And I say, well, you know, we'll build that taxi lane, but you don't have grant funding right now. And they say, well, people are knocking on the door. So they say, go build the hangars. We'll put some gravel down, we'll put some millings down using local funds, and we'll just, you know, you can get your aircraft up and down it. And people do that, and that's fine. It's the county's airport. And so the rules are, you can do whatever you want with your airport.
Unless you take federal money.
Right. And as soon as you take federal money, you have to operate by their grant assurances. But if you want to do improvement projects, you know, expand your airport and not use federal funds for it, such as what they did in the past where they put millions down, but there's nothing that says you can't do that. Obviously, there's some side effects to it associated with what Dustin's referring to there.
And you have to follow FAA guidelines.
No. If you build a taxi lane using local funding, no, you can do
So
whatever
they
you
could-
want.
Just hypothetically, Brian Becker. So hypothetically, they could take and get rid of the asphalt, make it a grass runway, or expand our grass runway that's already there, and not have to worry about it. They could set hangars as pole buildings. They could go in and get a DEQ grant, because this is all DEQ. There's a little BLM here. Most of your private stuff is along the river. So the county could go in, get a DEQ grant, and expand this way instead of this deal. Put hangars up there and lay gravel and do it on their own, and not require any FAA funding.
As long as they didn't use federal funding for it. The only caveat to that is the county's obviously been receiving federal funding for several years. So most of these grants, every time you sign a new grant, it has a 20-year grant assurances to it, meaning that for the next 20 years, you abide by these grant assurances. So if you don't abide by some of the grant assurances, the FAA could come to you and say you have to pay the money back that we've given you over the past X number of years, how long you've been receiving it.
How much have they actually been given over those years since you guys, that's been used?
Right, yeah, it's only what's been used, it's not what gets expired. But yeah, it would be, I I don't have that figure, but, you know, you've done I personally worked on a number of projects out here. We reconstructed the runway, back in,
2005,
that was 2007, but might have been
probably.
2005.
I wasn't
yeah.
here then.
We've done a pavement maintenance project for you. We bought equipment, snow removal equipment, the loader that's out there. We built that parallel taxiway that's there. So, I mean, you would be in the,
So the loader's just for the airport use?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
And they have to
Should
hand
be
in their
airport use.
receipts and invoices
Should
from
be.
it.
The cars, money, can that be used for snow removal as maintenance? I think
Cars
that,
money?
cars
No,
or SARS or
they're-
what, the first, grant money that you referred to that could be only
oh,
used for.
the CARES.
CARES.
That's right.
Can that be used for snow removal? Because that is a maintenance item.
Oh, yeah, that would be considered maintenance.
Okay.
Okay, good. Another question, similar. Existing taxiway, as you see it, our existing taxiway is right here.
Yep.
And you know, along with the aprons that, or I should say the exits on the runway,
Mm-hmm.
kinda line up fairly well with that, but the new taxiway is way over here.
Mm-hmm.
So when we put in this new taxiway, does it have to be here? Or can it just be wide, kinda like this open area here? So people can taxi just straight, or are they gonna have to go around the existing structures and go?
Yeah, they're gonna, if the FAA provides funding for construction of this parallel here, it will
Mhm.
have to be as shown on this map. That's the minimum distance it can be from the runway.
For any small airport, there's no
No,
lower,
No, that's for any B1 airport, remember, because the FAA wants you to plan to lose that small designation. If you were a B1 small and your master plan said stay as a B1 small,
yeah,
then yeah, you could build that parallel taxiway straight. And just so you know, the FAA isn't picking on you all of the B1 small airports throughout Idaho
Mhm.
and Montana have been asked to plan for growth and expansion. So,
that makes sense.
I'm not aware of any airports that have done recent master plans where the FAA said, okay, you're a B1 small and it's
We'll
just
just
stay
keep
there
you
for
a
the next
B1
one year.
small.
Yeah.
You're right, because we're a little bit restricted in growth on several levels. One, we don't have as much flat land as Kootenai County,
Oh, yeah.
you know, as far as the amount of people. And then number two, the airport is kind of constricted, obviously, due to the river and the highway.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, okay, so how much bigger and why? Do we need it?
Mhm.
You know, yeah, it gets tight, you know, for certain aircraft, but the amount of large aircraft that comes in here, very few, and they're, you know, pilot in command goes, yeah, we're not flying our Gulfstream 5 into here, you know, we'll land at Coeur d'Alene and we'll take the cost, but, we still get lots of traffic just in biz jets.
Yeah.
And the largest, and then again, it's still up to the pilot in command. You know, it's a plenty long runway, 5,300 feet.
They put C-130s down here before, so you said earlier that tankers can't land on here. Well, why?
It's the
Because
Forest
of the weight?
Service, that's why.
Why, what's the Forest Service saying?
They're just very conservative on their rules.
For how
as
long a
far as
runway can be?
where they get based out of.
Okay, so it's not because the runway's not thick enough or set up enough.
There
Or
might be
even-
that too.
I would definitely highlight
a
that.
130
You would
can
not
land
want
anywhere,
a
but-
large aircraft making regular operations on this pavement, especially on a hot
Right.
summer day.
Oh,
because-
yeah.
So on hot days, that's air density,
No,
Really
it
different.
hurts the asphalt more.
does it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it would leave
okay, I
ruts
didn't
in
know
your
that.
asphalt.
Yeah, so we never really think about weight of aircraft because heck, they fly, right? Well, they have less wheels and they're smaller. So the weight is concentrated versus a vehicle. Anyhow, one last question. How many feet in front of the hangar is considered private use?
I need to
Cannot-
look that up because they just changed it. It used to be half the wingspan of the classification of the airport, so like a B1, I think is wingspan up to, boy, I'd have to look. It used to be half the wingspan, but they recently changed it, and I think they just went to a set distance for everything, no matter what.
So half the
size
wingspan would be like 20 feet.
Right.
So my,
I think
Dave,
it's still gonna be in that region, it's, you know, I'm not sure, maybe 25 feet or something, but
Right.
it's not gonna change dramatically from that.
I think, you know, going along with your question about in front of an apron, it might end up being a compromise. You know, he does half, you do up to, you know.
Yeah, but I just found yesterday where the county commissioners previously committed to doing the entire aprons.
Oh,
So,
okay.
just found that yesterday, so, with some help, so we're gonna have to work on that, so I'm pumping Trey for, like, can we get some money for this? But it doesn't sound like we're gonna get any federal money to do those aprons.
Why this design here for land accumulation? What was the thought process that went in there?
Basically, if you draw a line here, this is for development. This is for the automated weather observation system, which requires a 500-foot clear area around it, so it's, the
Okay.
sensors aren't impacted.
There's
Is there a reason why they didn't go in through here opposite of these, make this part of Hangar Row instead of just right here? And because this is all DEQ, this is the dog park,
Mhm.
or proposed dog park anyway.
Yep.
And I think most of all this is DEQ.
Right.
Why not expand this? We can expand that road, we don't have to worry about the apron width because you get enough land here to be able to allow for that. And then you're just taxing past here, past the fuel dumps, just like we do from this hangar anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing's changing there.
So the reason why I was trying to allude to that earlier in the conversation, but originally when we started the EA, we were going to include the complete
Okay.
development. And the FAA said that's not an approved alternative for us due to the location of these wetlands right here, which is
Right,
really
it's right there,
wetlands.
yeah, that's the
But-
pond there, but from this point on, there's no wetlands.
Right, and the
for sure.
wetlands was kind of minor, you can mitigate wetlands off-site, but what you can't mitigate off-site are what's known as 4F impacts, and it's all due to those public trails right through there.
Okay, cause all the trails run along the creek, there's nothing back here.
Oh, well, yeah, so the previous airport manager provided a map of where those trails are to the FAA.
Rich
and-
Avers.
And they showed, basically a looping trail through here that he had.
That was a want.
A what?
That was a want.
That wasn't actually
Yeah.
a thing.
And
When's the
in-
last time you've been out?
Well, again, this came from, Mr. Avers, who was, I believe he used to actually maintain those trails.
Yeah, there's no trail along here at all. Then
Okay.
all the trails go along the river is where everybody walks their dog, and then they usually stop, let's see, they're stopping somewhere around here. There's nothing over here.
Well, I mean, it's not to say that we can't revise, you know, the
Well,
approach to the EA, it's
It would
still
just make more
open.
sense, and it would, you know, before I bought my airplane, I had called and was assured that there'd be hangar space available. That was a lie. And now I have an antique airplane that has to sit outside in the weather because I was given false information. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought the bird in the first place. So from my perspective, I'm looking for how can I get a covered area. It doesn't even have to be a full hangar, just a covered area. I mean, and this would be a question for you guys, where we have the tie-down areas. Can I put up a temporary hangar like, they're basically a big tent, and use that in lieu of the tie-down spot? It's still using the same tie-down, but it would obviously cover a little more area because it would be a tent. But acquiring a piece of land from DEQ shouldn't be that difficult. And the county can do that without an awful lot of effort. And then it's up to the people that wanna build a hangar. They can divide the land up, lease it, and then I cover the expense for my hangar, my apron, et cetera, because it's a new acquisition, you guys can rewrite the rules.
Real quick, can you grab this? I have to leave. Oh, I mean, you grab it when you're done.
And I need to open up, does anybody else have questions? I didn't mean to have just one or two folks. Matt, you have any?
Yes, I do.
questions?
Yeah.
Thanks, Dustin.
I appreciate you coming out here. This is the first time this kind of a meeting's ever happened, because I've the last group said that these hangars were gonna have to be moved. Now you're saying away from the runway,
Yeah.
but now you're saying unless we move out of a B1 small, or do the expansion, they're good.
Well, they're good and they are for the life of the structure. The
They're
FAA would-
grandfathered, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
The FAA would like to say, you know, don't do any improvements to these structures. Of course, most of them are owned privately, so the private owner can do as they choose. But if for some reason that hangar is not going to be utilized anymore, by all means, have it pushed back. But no, it's not, there's no plan to knock down hangars and push them back. It's just eventually, you know, eventually all hangars will have to fall down, although you'll have some concrete ones out there. Those things are gonna last forever.
So I guess my question, is there any floodway issues with your expansion?
Yeah, well, we did a floodplain analysis under the EA. Basically, the requirements under the EA are that we have to show that the proposed improvements won't raise the flood level by more than a foot.
Okay.
So our analysis showed that the limited, you know, I call it limited because now we're only focusing on the west, at least currently, it could change, won't increase the floodplain out there by more than a foot. But
Last
obviously-
question, when we put these properties over to do expand, DEQ gonna put us on the hook to do the remediation on the whole property? Any ideas?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I would definitely anticipate, not having to remediate them, but yeah, we'd have to meet all of the Superfund site requirements for earthwork, capping the disturbed areas, all that stuff is going to come into play, you know.
One last thing, just going through, I like numbers. I was going through your sheet here, and you didn't, and maybe you did this on purpose, maybe I'm asking a dumb question, but you didn't, there was no maintenance ever put back on. As you're rotating through the years, you said 5 years to redo the airport. So, I just, well, there should be, but.
That is a really good point, and there should be. Like I said, we focus intently on the CIP for like the next 3 years, and beyond that, it's kind of like big picture projects. But he's got a great point that, you know, you should see maintenance on your CIP every 5 to 7 years. But
I really appreciate you coming here and explaining stuff. You
My
did a
pleasure.
very good job.
Where's the grass runway? Are you guys showing it here?
I'm actually,
Because it's.
as long as I've been out there, oh, is that it right
Yeah,
there?
that's
Okay.
it. No, it's definitely there. I mean, that's
So
what.
according to the FAA, just so you know, there is no grass runway out there, but I understand a lot of airports have areas designated for pilot's discretion in terms of that. So it would just be just right on the south side here. So it's not unofficial, no.
So are we getting an updated map of this that shows the grass runway and the standoffs from the hangars and all that? Since this one's old, do you guys have an updated version?
No, so this master plan, like I said, I think it was finalized in 2013. Typically, if your airport was growing a lot, it's a 20-year planning document, but typically it's updated every 10 years. But just based on my experience with the FAA, I would expect them, even though we're at that 10-year threshold, they would probably say, nothing's happened out there, because you literally, since that master plan was done, there have been no improvements, no expansion at the airport due to a number of factors. But because there's no change to the airport, I don't anticipate the FAA is gonna require you to update your master plan probably for another 5 to 7 years, or until something starts changing. You know, if you get this taxi lane development built, they might say, okay, let's reevaluate now. So to answer your question, this is still your current master plan
Okay.
as it sits.
But I
But
just know-
that grass strip will likely never be shown on your master plan. I say likely because the FAA did provide guidance last year about the development of grass strips adjacent to runways, but currently they are, I don't know, I think a lot of people have, as soon as they saw that language, they said, I want to build a grass runway. And the FAA said, we're not ready to evaluate this yet. So they've been kicking that can down the road. It just came out, like I said, last year, which is really new for the FAA stuff. But I don't think that runway and that location will ever be shown on your master plan as an official runway.
See, it should, because if we don't start showing it early, then working with the federal government, then it never existed. And then, because I mean, Idaho has the most off-airport runways of any state in the union except for Alaska.
Yeah.
And tons of our birds, including mine, come in with the Tundra tires and the whole 9 yards, they're tail draggers, and that's what you use is the
Right.
grass runway.
Yeah.
And so that's gonna be something that's used a lot here. I mean, to the point that locals will go out and mow it because the county's so slow getting to it at times. And hangar owners, things like that will go mow it so that it can be used.
Mhm.
So I would think that would be wanted to be added to the master plan, just so that it's not written off by the FAA from some policy they passed 10 years from now going, well, you guys have never had one. If you'd had one for the last 10 years, we could grandfather it in. That would avoid that potential.
Yeah, from the FAA's perspective, when you do a master plan, you use federal funding, the FAA has to approve this document. And they, at this time at least, not to say things aren't changing, because like I said, they've added the language for it, but when this was done back in 2013, the FAA would have never approved the master plan with a grass strip shown that close to the runway. They can say, they've said, yes, if you wanna build a grass strip, build it at the separation, which is unrealistic. It's like
Right.
1,000 feet
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Texas
exactly.
or something. But in terms of putting it right next to it, even though the Helena ADO does all of the Idaho airports, they know tons of Idaho airports have grass areas designated just like this. Basically, that right now the FAA's approach is, just don't tell me about it, and we understand it's an alternative location, but you can't show it in your master plan because it doesn't meet our guidance right now.
Did it meet its guidance when the master plan was developed?
Oh no, back then there was, if you wanted to have a grass runway, it needed to be, I think it's for your airport, it's probably a 700-foot separation from a center line to center line separation. I mean, you'd have had to have been on the other side of the interstate.
Yeah.
I hate to jump in, guys, but Commissioner Dose has a meeting to get to, not in just a little bit, so we probably need to wrap it up.
I just am appreciating the good information.
Yeah, for sure.
And I really have appreciated you taking the time.
My pleasure.
And I'm sure we'll have many more good conversations, cause you piqued my interest, and I wanna learn more about this process, so.
Okay.
I'll reach out, Trey, after they've had some time, and then they'll
And we'll
catch
get
Commissioner Casady up to
Get you
speed,
an
so
answer
we
on
can
that.
Great,
set
appreciate
another
it.
See how we can roll forward.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
and thank you for those of you who participated. I'm gonna bring this meeting to a close. Trey, thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome, my pleasure.